Imagine, just for a moment, that you're walking in the shoes of an 18th century French, Austrian, Russian, or Swedish soldier. Smell the gunpowder, hear the drumbeat of marching feet, feel the weight of your musket and the specter of death lingering over the battlefield. The fate of Europe is on the brink, shifting alliances and growing tensions set to explode into what would become one of the most significant wars of all time, the 7 Years' War. I'm sure you're wondering, what was the catalyst for such a monumental conflict? Well, my friends, that story is more twisted than the powdered wigs of the French courtiers. It's time to step back into the past and watch as Europe flips on its head in what we historians like to call the diplomatic revolution. Get ready, because we're about to dive into the nitty-gritty of this riveting tale. Once upon a time, there were two continental heavyweights, France and Austria. Sworn enemies for centuries, they were as likely to break bread together as a lion might with a gazelle. But as the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. In the 1750s, this old adage came into play with a vengeance. Let's dial back the clock and look at our two main characters in this grand spectacle, France and Austria. These continental heavyweights were like oil and water, lions and gazelles, Montagues and Capulets. You get the idea. Their hatred was as ancient as the vineyards of Bordeaux, rooted in centuries of territorial squabbles, religious conflicts, and the egos of kings and queens who would sooner lose their crowns than admit defeat. Let's take a stroll down the memory lane. Remember Louis XIV, the Sun King, France's golden boy? His aggressive expansionist policies had repeatedly put him at odds with the Habsburg dynasty of Austria, leading to wars that left deep scars and an undying thirst for revenge. Then we have the likes of Charles VI of Austria, the Habsburg emperor, whose entire reign seemed to be one long, drawn-out feud with France. As Britain's power grew, particularly on the high seas, France was put into a quandary. British supremacy threatened French colonies, trade, and prestige. On the other side of the continent, Austria watched nervously as Prussia emerged as a formidable rival. Its territory of Silesia had already been snatched away in the War of Austrian Succession, and Austria was eager to get it back. Sometimes, when you're surrounded on all sides, the most unthinkable alliances become your only option. This, my friends, is where our tale takes a twist. The 1750s saw this old adage, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," come alive as never before. For France and Austria, uniting against common enemies seemed not just a strategic move, but a necessary survival tactic. The game was on, and the stakes were nothing less than the balance of power in Europe. Enter the stage, Louis XV of France, a king often criticized for his inability to maintain the splendor of his forefathers, yet no one could deny his keen understanding of the shifting sands of European power. By his side, his advisor, the Duke of Choiseul, a man whose cunning and intellect were sharper than the finest French rapier. As they observed the growing might of Britain, a bitter realization struck them like a chill wind off the English Channel. Britain's naval superiority and burgeoning colonies posed a threat to France's own global ambitions. They needed a check on this power, a counterweight. Their gaze turned to the east, towards an old enemy who bore the same unease towards Britain's increasing influence. Austria. A country battered and bruised, yet stubborn as a mule, and longing to regain its lost glory. In Austria, the indomitable Empress Maria Theresa held the reins. A woman of iron will and diplomatic acumen, she sought to recover Silesia, the jewel ripped from Austria's crown by the audacious Prussian king, Frederick the Great. As this political chess game unfolded, attention was drawn to the icy expanses of the north. Russia, under the reign of the resolute Empress Elizabeth, was a force to be reckoned with. Elizabeth, much like Maria Theresa of Austria, was a woman in a man's world, undeterred and unbroken. The Russian bear had its eyes on the Prussian eagle, hungry for territorial expansion and driven by an age-old desire to see Russia shine brighter on the European stage. Elizabeth saw in this grand alliance an opportunity to challenge Prussia, a thorn in Russia's side, and assert her country's power. Further west, Sweden, a shadow of its former glory from the days of the great power in the 17th century, longed to regain its past stature. Under the rule of King Adolf Frederick, an unlikely leader thrust into power by political machinations, Sweden found itself facing both internal challenges and external threats. The lost territories, snatched away in previous conflicts, were a constant, painful reminder of Sweden's fated grandeur. This Franco-Austrian alliance presented an opportunity for Sweden to turn the tide, reclaim what was lost, and reassert its influence. The stage was set for an epic conflict, with a team that was as formidable as it was unexpected. The whispers of war spread across Europe, each nation, each leader, and each soldier aware of the gathering storm. Europe found itself entangled in an intricate tapestry of alliances, enmities, and ambitions. It was the beginning of a war that would touch every corner of the continent, a conflict whose echoes would resound in the annals of history. But, as the saying goes, every rose has its thorns. And this rose had more than a fair share of prickles. Our unlikely alliance, while formidable on paper, was not without its problems. You see, ruling a country in the 18th century wasn't exactly a cakewalk. Each country was battling its own domestic demons. We are talking about the kind of problems that give rulers sleepless nights and an unhealthy attachment to their crowns. Political intrigue, as much a part of royal courts as the lavish feasts and extravagant attire, threatened stability at every turn. France, with its powerful nobility, had a long history of courtly machinations that could derail even the best laid plans. Russia, too, was no stranger to power struggles within the palace, while Austria and Sweden had their fair share of noble factions vying for influence. Economic troubles were another thorn in the side. France was staggering under the weight of debt, a situation that would eventually ignite the powder keg of revolution. Austria was still recovering from the War of Austrian Succession, which had depleted its coffers and strained its economy. Russia and Sweden, while not as severely hit, also faced economic challenges that hindered their war efforts. Social unrest was the third demon. The common people, you see, weren't exactly thrilled about the prospect of war. Wars meant taxes, conscription, and the very real possibility of not seeing their loved ones return home. Discontent simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. And then there was the daunting task of coordinating their forces on a battlefield that spanned continents. This was no small skirmish in a shared backyard. This was a fight that extended across the globe, from the snow-covered fields of Russia to the tropical jungles of the Americas. It was, in effect, like trying to herd cats. Armored, gun-wielding, occasionally grumpy cats. Each with their own mind, their own agenda, their own quirks. No doubt, the leadership of this alliance had their work cut out for them. But as they say, where there is a will, there is a way. And the leaders of these nations were nothing if not determined. As we'll see, they would use every tool at their disposal, every strategy in their playbook, to make this alliance work, thorns and all. The question was, would it be enough to overcome the power of Prussia and Britain? That, my friends, is a story for another day. Despite their struggles at home and the immense challenge of coordinating efforts across vast distances, our unlikely alliance rolled up its sleeves and dove into the fray. The battlegrounds of Kolin, Rossbach, Leuthen, and Kunersdorf, once mere dots on the map, transformed into dramatic stages where the fate of nations was decided. Each battle was a brutal chess match where monarchs and generals were the players, and armies of men the pieces. With each move, each sacrifice, and each gamble, the stakes grew higher. Strategies were crafted and discarded, stunning maneuvers were executed, bluffs called, and sometimes, sheer audacity won the day. Some battles ended in triumph, the fields echoing with the cheers of the victorious. Kolin, for instance, was a splendid Austrian victory where they managed to repel the Prussian forces, showcasing the prowess of Austria's fighting spirit. Others, like Rossbach and Leuthen, were disasters, bitter pills to swallow. Here, the Prussians, under the brilliant command of Frederick the Great, made their mark, inflicting crushing defeats on both the Austrians and the French. And then there was Kunersdorf, a battle that brought both spectacular success and crushing defeat. Here, the Russian and Austrian forces scored a stunning victory against the Prussians, only to suffer devastating losses themselves. And so, we reach the end of this chapter. We've explored the intricate web of alliances, marveled at the tenacity of our unlikely allies, and journeyed through the battlegrounds that were the turning points of the 7 Years' War. But remember, every story has two sides. Next time, we will pivot our gaze to the other side of this grand chessboard, to an alliance that was every bit as intriguing and formidable. The British and Prussians, under the leadership of George II and Frederick the Great, were not merely observers in this grand dance of nations. They were active participants, matching move for move, strategy for strategy, in a bid to shape the future in their favor. Get ready for a deep dive into the inner workings of the British-Prussian alliance, their motivations, their strategies, and their unforgettable battles. It promises to be every bit as thrilling and enlightening as our journey thus far. If you are enjoying this voyage through history, show some love by gently pushing the like button. And if you want to keep up with our adventures, be sure to subscribe. What do you think was the most daring move made by the Franco-Austrian alliance? Which leader do you admire the most? And what are your predictions for the British-Prussian alliance? We're eager to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment down below. Remember, history is a grand tapestry, and every thread, every color, every knot matters. So, until we meet again, stay curious, stay excited, and as always, keep the wheels of time turning.